So to try and sort of just bring this little piece together to a closure this morning, where we've really been focusing on, well, you know, what are control rooms? What are critical control rooms, and what part does AV play in those critical control rooms? We're going to have a little panel debate now which kind of just finishes off that and explores it. What I want to do first, gentlemen, though, is if perhaps from this side going that way, you just give us a few seconds on who you are and where do you come from, please.
Yes, good morning. I am Thierry. I'm working for the European Space Agency in Darmstadt, where we are controlling spacecraft. So this is also remote control operations.
It's quite interesting to start with. Space Agency, that's not a bad start, is it?
Yeah, I don't know if I can compete to that.
Let's see.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carver. I'm from the States, as you might be able to tell from the accent. I'm the Director of Sales currently for Hexagon in the eastern half of the U.S. But prior to that, I served in a 911 association in the States for 4 years as their Director of Operations, and prior to that, with the New York City Fire Department as Director of their 911 Operations Center. And I was with them for about 15 years, so a variety of experience in the space.
Thank you, Chris. That's not bad after Space Agency.
That's all right.
Okay, I think you'll agree. New York Fire, that's pretty all right. Oh, goodness.
So good morning, everyone. My name's David Jackson, and following on from I think the fastest subsonic flight from New York to London in 4 hours and 53 minutes the other morning. I run the Police Operations Centre, so we handle all of the emergency, non-emergency calls and all the deployments of police officers across London in the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much indeed. Jean-Pierre Lee.
Good morning. My name is Jean-Pierre Lee. I come from a Norwegian company called Cyviz. We are one of the largest builder of control rooms globally, and we have a great passion about the topics around control rooms. And
you're very pleased to be here.
Very pleased to be here in Amsterdam.
And like all of us, yeah. So I'm very pleased to be here too.
The fact that we actually made it here yesterday, I think it's,
yes, we nearly didn't make it. There were all sorts of problems coming into Amsterdam, as I understand it, the other day. Anyway, let's move on to this subject then, and I'm going to start from left to right for this first question as well, Thierry, if you don't mind. So what I'm saying here is, when we think of AV, what is it we imagine in our control rooms? What is AV to you in your work?
AV, I mean, we are now working at ESA in a very conservative way, if you want. So we are looking now into the future, and this AV business is really for us a path to follow. And we are still working in our control room in two ways. I mean, we have the team-oriented control room, where we are building up the control room around the teams, and we have the function driver. When we are in routine operations, for example, where in that case, we are building up our control room around the functions that are in the room. So we have to look at AV and be able to merge these two functions, or these two ways of controlling. And that's a challenge in the future.
Okay, I see. And Chris, what was your experience then in New York Fire some years ago, perhaps? But perhaps you're still out there in the marketplace. What do you see as the uses of AV in the control rooms today?
I would say there's actually a pretty significant danger that AV is underappreciated. Because it has to be if it's going to actually reach its potential. AV has to be the connection between the various forms of data and information that are coming from the public as they report emergencies and events, as we gain information from units that are on the field in an actual incident command perspective, and the data that is inherent in the control room about whether it's weather or resource management or the human factors, as you mentioned, inside the critical control room. AV is a critical component of managing all those and bringing them all together to create a common operational picture that we can actually use to improve our operation.
Common operational picture. There's an interesting term. Can you explain what you mean by common operational picture?
Sure. One of the biggest challenges that we found, and not just in New York, but in public safety throughout the United States, and I imagine in critical control rooms wherever you might come from, is that we have no problem getting data and information today. You know, with everyone having smartphones, with everyone having access to the various forms of technology they have, we have all of these disparate forms of data. But if we're going to make effective decisions about what to do with our resources, or what type of response to send to an event, or what type of information to share with responders, we have to all be speaking not only the same language, but from a common picture. Or else you'll be describing the back of a building that's on fire, while someone else will be describing the front. And that might be the difference between knowing that it's an occupied building and knowing that it's actually a chemical factory full of workers. So the concepts are critically important to be able to ensure that we all have that common view of what it is we're trying to do.
Sounds good, sounds good. David, the Met Police, it's looking after, London, a global city, millions of people live there, millions of people come in and go out every day. We've talked a little bit about safe cities and maybe what can that do. Where do you see the Met at the moment in terms of being able to provide this common operating picture and its use of AV?
So I'll start with AV first, Peter. I think really, there's an English saying, a picture paints 1,000 words. Mm-hmm. And if you come into one of my control rooms, go into the part of the structure where my agents are taking calls from members of the public, one of the most common things you'll see are my agents doing this. And what they're doing is they're listening very intently to what the caller on an emergency number is describing what they're seeing. And the agent is trying to visualize in their mind what the person who's on the other end of the phone is actually seeing. And I have a saying, the quicker you can visualize something, the quicker you can operationalize it. Mm-hmm. And that's really important in a time-bound, time-sensitive emergency. And I see, as technology evolves, and I'm going to come on to this in my presentation after coffee, there are huge opportunities, first of all, for critical control rooms to ingest AV product to speed up that quite often life-saving decision-making that is needed to be able to respond to that emergency that is unfolding. And of course, we have exactly the same approach, and I'm sure Chris will agree here in terms of response. We've also then got to narrate the story that we've got in the control room to the officers that are responding on the street. How do we get them in the right thinking space that when they arrive on scene, they already have a good picture of what they're going to see, how they're going to deal with it, or are vital minutes wasted as the first officers arrive on scene trying to work out exactly what they're dealing with. So we see AV as a huge opportunity, and as I'll cover in my presentation later, there's also some threats that we need to think about.
Okay, thank you for that. So to be exploited, which sort of infers that today we're not there yet, and echoing Chris's terms. I won't ask you what you think of the traditional uses, but come on, you're from the supplier side. Be careful because they're potential end users and potential customers. But what is your experience of the use of AV by the end user community?
I think AV is one of the three, on a very high level, key building blocks in a control room, in a modern control room. You can start with the IT, the network. Control rooms in 2020 have, to me, very strict security requirements. That's the IT part. What David has talked about is the aspect of bringing video conference and the field back into the control room. That's the unified collaboration, video conferencing into the control room. That's the second kind of industry meeting the control room. And the third part, audiovisual, is a key role. Audiovisual is where humans meet data. Yeah. And the technology is changing rapidly, and we see a lot more of high-performance video feeds coming in to the control rooms. And that requires new technologies.
Well, and again, this is what I started off by saying right at the outset, is this new technologies are bringing much more information in many different forms that critical control rooms haven't been used to in the past. And I'm sure David's going to touch on some of the challenges surrounding that, but it's also some of the opportunities and also the risks around that as well, and how best to incorporate it in the control room, how best to present it, and along with other data. So a fascinating insight. David, to what sort of degree are you using audiovisual today? What are the key things you're using? I know you've got screens on tables for the individual operator, banks of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, thanks, Peter. In my presentation, there is a picture of one of the floors of my control room. So we've been using AV in a very sort of linear way for the best part of the 30 years that I've been working in this space. I remember when I first started in critical control rooms in 1990, we had cathode ray tube video monitors connected to CCTV cameras and kilometers of coaxial cable behind. So we've always had the ability to be able to see certain aspects, and we've used that to help our decision making. What I think we are now looking at is we're standing on the edge of the capability, both to what Jan just said around the networks, etc. We've got far more opportunities now in the future. But I do see that, the UK, we're very fortunate with the amount of public space CCTV cameras that we've got access to. I know that's not commonplace in other jurisdictions, but certainly we do have that public space safety awareness, even if it is quite binary and quite linear. And what I hope to do, and what I hope to see in the next 4 to 5 years, is us really building on a far more agile space, whilst at the same time coming from the other direction is the issues such as ethics and privacy, and how do you actually find that balance depending on the context of what amount of data in whatever form you can see to be able to achieve a mission of keeping citizens safe versus the individual rights of privacy. And I may touch on live facial recognition, for example, during my presentation.
Very good, thank you. Now, Thierry, I hear about European Space Agency, and of course I get carried away and I think about Star Trek and all this kind of thing. And I'm thinking your control room, it must be like the Hunger Games picture we saw earlier on. Lots of holograms and all the rest of it. I mean, is that the case?
I wish it would be the case.
Try and give us a view. I think you're speaking later, but just give us a quick view on where are you today?
So we are now following basically the evolution of the technology. We try, but very slowly. We are following up what is happening. You will see in the presentation the evolution of our control rooms. And when I mention the control room, it's basically the main control room. This is a control room that we are using where we are launching spacecraft. And in that case, the way we are conducting operations is the same. I mean, it has not changed the last 20 years. So the people, the flight control team, they really want to stick to this function, the way they are working. So we adapt the technology to the organization of the team. So of course we have much more modern consoles, work positions. We are integrating LEDs. The beamers have the tendency to disappear. We are looking in LEDs technologies. Why not 3Ds as well? But this is really going slowly in that direction, because by injecting this new technology, we don't want to disturb the way the people are working.
Yeah.
And this is what they are used to.
Okay, thank you for that. Chris, it's a few years since you were out of the Fire Department of New York there, but I mean, what kind of AV were they typically employing at that time? And then let's start thinking about the future. But what were they using at the time?
Well, unfortunately, very little, and the operational impacts of that could at times be severe. But I think, following up to what everybody has said, there's something very important that everyone should take from this discussion, is that it is by no means the end to anything. Yeah. Even if the most wonderful AV technology is put into every critical control room on the planet tomorrow, it actually opens up far more doors than it closes. The case in point, the human factors element. But then the next piece is that it's going to require some sort of AI, some sort of machine learning, or the challenge will become that new environment that we create can actually overwhelm and overload those who are working in that space and required to perform. And that's that balancing act, that whether you're a vendor, whether you're a provider, whatever your role is, that we have to always maintain an awareness of, that we do not degrade the capability of the operation in an effort to bring in new technology and capability.
Okay, so if you were thinking then, you were back in your job, you were doing FDNY, and you were looking at this big investment that the mayor's just given you, he's given you all this money, what are you going to be spending your AV on? What would be the ultimate ambition through the deployment of AV? What kind of outcomes and benefits are you looking for? And would it just be singular or siloed, or can you see what do you think of this whole safe cities thing?
And actually, safe cities is exactly what I was going to say, is that it's an integration of a variety of sources of information and data. Okay. That AV and CAD, I believe, will have to be the two places where all of this comes together, probably in a sense where they're integrated in and of themselves.
Sorry, CAD?
CAD, computer-assisted dispatch, the software that allows 112 and 911 centers and others to actually do their job and really intake information from the public and then manage resources.
Thank you.
That piece needs to be integrated with the AV piece so that we can, again, go back to that common operational picture. What we had in New York at the time, and something that most people don't know, whether it's Superstorm Sandy or the blackout of 2003 or 9/11, all of those were managed on a CAD system, on a computer system that was black screen, green letters, 1978 vintage. far older than most of the people who were using it to manage that event. Now, the really cool part is, though, it worked well. Why did it work well? Because of the lessons learned from before about managing information flow and ensuring that the system worked. Could it have been better? Would it have been nice to have additional AV and things like that? Absolutely. And it provides some indication of where we need to go in the future. But it also provides a reminder of the importance of tying in what we do to making sure that it's effective.
Okay. David, can I ask you the same question, really? Again, global city, the opportunities for joining up the silos. Is AV a part of that? Is it much more about the underlying technologies?
So I'm grateful to Chris talking about black screens and green text, because that's the platform we are just in the process of replacing. Our command and control system's 37 years old, and for the computer geeks in the room is written in a language called Fortran, which I had to go and Google because I've never heard of it. But there we go. There we go. And before that, it was a telex system. So for the older generation in the room, you'll probably remember that with fondness. The common information picture, or the common operating picture, is a really, really, it's a completely separate discussion for me, Peter, actually. We are finding more and more in operating in public spaces to keep people safe and secure. There are different agencies coming together. And I think actually the most important part of creating a common information picture, or common operating picture, is the data. You've got to get the right data at the right place in front of the right person at the right time and visualized in a way which aids decision making. And that sounds really, really easy to say, and it's hugely, hugely difficult. One of the things that I see as a trend going forward in the next 10 to 15 years is that traditionally we've always put people together in control rooms. And I wonder whether if we could start through the power of AV technology as an enabling platform and a really good understanding of data, whether we actually need to have people physically co-located in order to provide a really effective service in critical control rooms. We've already started remote working on all sorts of things. We heard from Sam this morning, how they're actually enabling remote operations, usually through technology. But I think that a really powerful data model, and it's something that we're looking at in London, how do you knit together the police, the fire, the ambulance, and all the other emergency tier one responders, but not create some huge building, which in the centre of London, of course, costs an absolute fortune. Yeah. So what is the optimum division between a really good enabling data layer that's also enabled by technology, and how much extra benefit is actually enabled by having people physically co-located to exchange that information?
Very good.
If I may add just a moment, one of the other things too that I think the technology that we're talking about here allows is for us to think outside the box when it comes to not just how big the building should be or what systems are in it, but who should be there and when. Mm-hmm. For example, a disaster that, God forbid, involves a space agency or involves a utility may benefit from a temporary co-location of folks that normally would not work together. And as we gain the capacity in AV and other technologies to support what I would call a flexible control room environment, that's a very powerful tool that we've never had before due to the rigidity of the systems that were involved.
Thank you very much for that, Chris.
Just a follow-up comment on that, because I think it's spot on. I think the control rooms are going from very static environments, and the acceleration of innovation in control rooms will just move even faster in the future. More and more applications will kind of meet the operators in the control rooms, and they're becoming true dynamic environments, either to allow that multidisciplinary team working on a crisis or a project or whatever they're working on, and that might change throughout the day. And they need to have that flexible environment and for the technology to support AI, AR, VR when it comes.
Yeah. So just on that point again, actually, so I'm looking very closely at our Foreign Affairs Ministry, who all of our embassy networks, regardless of which country you're a citizen of, your embassy networks around the world will have some kind of crisis response capability. But it's very, very expensive to start bringing people together physically to be able to either in business as usual or in crisis. And where I'm seeing an awful lot of innovation is within that international network, foreign ministries, global corporations who have some kind of crisis response capability. The banking and financial sector A lot of those organisations have a follow-the-sun process in terms of being able to maintain that critical command and control without having to put in place very, very expensive structures or start physically moving people around the world to get into the theatre operations. And I think Jan's entirely right. We're going to see a lot more virtualisation going forward, particularly when it comes to your point, Chris, around those people that don't normally work together but need to come together for a particular mission and to execute a specific number of tasks to deliver a good outcome.
Thierry, you've heard some things there about sharing amongst agencies. My impression would be that the European Space Agency doesn't act on its own. I guess it has to talk to NASA and all these other places as well. Do you see any similarities in your field?
Yes, of course. I mean, we are sharing our, for example, our ground station network with JAXA and NASA and all these space agencies. And the remote aspect is quite important. Also, when we are sending spacecraft to the launch pad, we need to remotely access them. And virtual reality in that sense, I mean, could be also helping. Each time we have to configure a system abroad, I mean, in Australia or in South Africa, we have to send somebody there on site just to, handle a simple computer and configure it with knobs and pressing some interface. And this could be avoided with virtual reality, where you could interface with the operator on the other side of the world and simply configure this piece of equipment that cannot be remotely addressed with virtual reality. So we are looking into the project that we have nowadays into these various aspects, of course. I don't know if they are going to go into really the control rooms in terms of controlling the spacecraft themselves, because, but it could be possible. We are not like what we have seen the presentation on aircraft control. We are trying to do the opposite. I mean, we are trying to control more and more spacecraft with one operator. Oh. The spacecraft controller now is quite a lonely person. In the past, you had the spacecraft controller surrounded by engineers, so looking at the spacecraft 24/7. Nowadays, I mean, with automation of the remote access, the configuration of the ground segment, you can basically control Earth observation spacecraft with nobody. Just looking at the telemetries and reacting when there is already something happening. Yeah. And when something is happening, and this is the point, then you need the engineers, the comms engineers, you need the onboard engineers, the specialists from the payloads, you need the spacecraft controllers. And these people do not have necessarily the space, because space, I mean, it's like in New York or London, space is expensive in terms of rooms, So we would need to bring these people together and discuss on the specific project or the specific problem that we have. And to do that, we need to bring also the data to these people, wherever they are, and not necessarily in Germany, in Darmstadt. This is maybe the future for us. Yeah.
That's fascinating, and it was interesting you say that maybe one person, maybe no people are controlling all of these things. With ICRA, yes, the ICRA Congress this year was held in Athens, and we went to visit the control room of the Greek gas provider. And it was just amazing that the whole of the Greek gas network, all the way through Greece, out to Italy, into Bulgaria and places, 2 people controlled that at any one time. Just incredible. The whole thing was controlled by 2 people. Jan, you were enthused by what you saw in Athens.
Absolutely.
Tell them about it.
It's a fantastic one. I just want a follow-up comment to what you just said, because we've been building control rooms for military and defense globally for the last 10 years. And those security requirements that we previously saw in defense are now coming into the public and private sector. And they're driven by changes on how people work in control rooms. We see organizations starting to outsource services. So all of a sudden you have 2 competitors sitting side by side in the control room, working on the same data, bringing their own networks in. Wow. And you don't want your competitor to see your information. Okay. So the security aspect, when you have a distributed workforce collaborating around the world, like you said, Dave, is becoming, I think, one of the number one things to consider and work on for this industry going forward.
Okay. Jan and then Chris, just with your private sector heads on, let's just stop and think a moment about what we're actually seeing from the end customers in terms of their requirements now in this space. So what kind of changes are you starting to witness in terms of their needs from you as suppliers? Why don't you start with that one, Jan, because you're there.
We're just finishing one project now, and I think the underlying driver there is that the control room operators are going from a scenario where they're working on 3 applications to 13, and they're not increasing the number of staff in the control room.
So many more applications coming in for these guys, no changes in the numbers and all the rest of it, so intense working environment becomes even more intense, so the whole presentation has got to be paramount.
And another trend, and I hope we see more, and I really like the question from the architect earlier, the human aspect and how we build these rooms, because very often we come into projects and come into buildings and are asked to build a control room, and you know it's going to be a bad project for the poor souls that will work 24/7 in those rooms. Yeah. And the more these type of projects can be planned in advance, the better working environment, and I think the better decisions will actually be made in these rooms.
Okay, that's great. Chris, now obviously you've got the experience only recently with Hexagon, but prior to that with NENA as well, the North American Emergency Number Association. So what are the emerging requirements that are going to be driven by this?
I don't mean to sound like like someone that wants to say something scary, but in the United States at least, and I think in the Americas too, we have a serious problem with a bifurcation.
The what, sorry?
Bifurcation. In other words, some of our centers, some of our agencies, some of our organizations are becoming incredibly progressive. They attend events like this. They want to learn what's possible with technology, and they want to make effective decisions. They talk to architects. They learn about change management, and they bring all these things in a way that really helps. And then we have, unfortunately, Group 2. And the Group 2s are the people that either don't want to change or unwilling to change, or are unwilling to ask those who are impacted by change how to make it work. And as a vendor, and also in the association world, interacting with those 2 different groups of people are very hard, because sometimes they can be in the same agency, sometimes they can be at the very same table, and sometimes they can be in the decider role at the same time for a project. And that challenge about how to move the entire industry forward that we're here as a part of, while managing and navigating that really challenging environment, is probably, I think, the biggest problem that we face.
Well, Chris, now you've kind of accused the end users of being in 2 groups. I kind of ought to approach some of the end users and find out whether they're in Group 1 or Group 2, really.
I think if they're here, I have a suspicion about what they might be.
I think you and I think we're on safe territory here. But I'm going to go to Frankfurt Airport, and I'm going to give Frankfurt Airport the microphone and say, look, Frankfurt, why did you come here today, and have you got any questions for any of these guys? You're obviously a Group 1. You're obviously out there thinking about stuff, and we're probably a lot better than Düsseldorf Airport, something like that, yeah?
We're not technically end users, though. We're like integrators.
That'll
like we plan control system at the airport in Frankfurt. Yeah, we have the challenge like facing end users. They're like on the same table, and almost like we're hierarchical decision making. So like if there's one head on top that is not progressive, that just thinks like everything has to be the same. That is really tough, and we have to face it like every day.
So you understand what was that word you used? What?
Bifurcation.
All right. Personally, I have no idea what that is, but anyway. But hands up, who were the other control room guys here? There was someone that you were. Where are you from, sir?
I'm from Mars van Vught, from the Greater Rotterdam Fire and Safety region. We are trying to, I recognize London and United States that we have very old applications, and we all the new AV technology and how to integrate it and know how to make that useful. And we're taking a pilot in the Eurovision Song Contest, how we can use AV in our dispatch center to get a better operation. So that's what we are learning now.
Very good, thank you for that. Okay, another one who's... You're going to hear from Rosano later, because he's got a fairly specialist control room.
I'm Rosano Giacchino from CERN.
Sorry, you did that a bit quick.
I'm Rosano Giacchino from CERN.
As in Large Hadron Colliders and things. Go on, Rosano.
I just would like to ask you the question, because you talked about remote control. We talk in our field since many years, and I join most of the comment that the gentleman from ESA does. But for us, technologically, I think that the remote controlling could be feasible, but the main problem is trust. And the question is, do you think that in the future AV could help to solve this trust problem?
That is a lovely question.
I would love to answer.
Go on then, Jan.
There's so many industries that have that discussion just now. And I think since we had Fugro here this morning in oil and gas, we have this discussion about moving people offshore, onshore. And from a technology point of view, you can absolutely do it. From a safety point of view, it probably makes sense to have people not on the platform, but on the shore location. I think the unions and the trust and actually get the organization to join that journey for that change is the hard part. And I think technology and AV plays part of that, will accelerate and even make it even easier to do it. But I think the hard part is the workers.
Okay.
And change management.
David.
Peter, you and I exchanged a smile earlier when I asked my question of Jose of what version 3 looks like. Can I just ask, is anyone in the audience from Luftfartsverket in Sweden, the Swedish air traffic control? Okay, so Peter and I were at a conference 2-3 years ago now, I think it was. Yeah. We kind of glossed over remote control, but Sweden now, in many of their airfields, have taken out their air traffic controllers from the towers and have put them into a warehouse 800 kilometres away. And they use virtual reality to simulate the experience. And I'm going to be careful what I say because I'm going to trespass a lot on what I'm going to say after coffee. But they use VR and AR to simulate what a controller would actually see and hear when they look up from their desk if they were sitting in a control tower. It was interesting actually when Marcus from Luftfartsverket announced this, that there were people mentally crossing Sweden off as a place to visit. But they've been running it now for quite a few years, and I don't recall ever having heard of any aircraft banging into each other as they're taxiing out to the runway. So it's pretty safe. But what Marcus talks about is a really kind of, and I'm going to use the word a lot in my presentation, the experience of the air traffic controller and having had to go back and retrofit sound into the control room, because experientially the controllers didn't like the feeling they could only see things, and they were missing certain of the sensory inputs that gave them trust, back to your point, Rosano, that gave them the trust, and I'm going to talk about this quite a lot after coffee. How do you get the users to trust through technology, through AV, whatever it might be, to actually get that feeling of innate trust that enables them to feel confident that the decision they are just about to make is the right decision? And that's a real critical question, which I'm going to expand on after coffee.
Okay, thank you for that, David. And you're bringing us nicely towards coffee, to be fair.
So
what I'm
really,
going to do
really
is I'm going to ask you guys one more question, and I'm going to pose it now, and then I'm going to address these guys for a moment, if that's okay. So I think the question, just to wrap up with, is a kind of, what's your most important example of current AV that you've come across or that you've witnessed and it's really added some value to your organization, or what do you anticipate could be the next big thing for you for AV? So have a little ponder while I just say to the gathered masses, and do you know what, there's quite a lot of people here. This is good. Give yourself a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, because you are here today, and this is good. The inaugural Control Room Summit, I like it. So what you're hearing is a lot of golden nuggets this morning. So if you're new to this control room environment, there's an awful lot of stuff you're starting to learn. We already touched on the importance that these people play on their, or that they put upon the roles that they perform, the jobs they do. They're very proud of that. So hopefully that's really dug into you, whether you're fire, space, aeronautical, whatever. They're very, very proud of what they do, and you need to be aware of that as you work with them. Trust, security, change management. These are things that when you, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe when you're putting some AV into a hotel or something, maybe it's not quite the same level of challenge that you've got as if you're going to work with these guys. So there's some nuggets there to take away, and I hope you've written them all down. And now I'm going to come back to you all and say, what's your favorite bit of AV you've experienced in your life? I'm going to start with you, Jan, because you're amongst it every day.
I think there are a lot of exciting things happening in AV. AV over IP is changing the game for many control rooms. New display types that lower heat, reduces the power consumption, no maintenance for 10 years. That's what our customers want.
Wow.
But I think it's important to avoid looking at AV as new boxes and cables and screens, because that's not what control rooms are all about. That's not what AV is all about. And I think a lot of companies have invested in control rooms many years ago, and they kind of painted themselves into a corner where they can't change building blocks. And in the private sector, control rooms last for 7 to 9 years. In public sector, 10, 15 plus. And you want to make sure that you invest in technology where you can adapt that technology when it comes, even if it means just replacing the display technology or another critical component. Because you don't want to go back and pay millions of pounds just to change small things.
Okay, Jan, thank you for that. Chris, I'll come to you. I mean, in the fire world, was it the introduction of drones with cameras that could fly over buildings and stuff? What was it?
We'll talk about the drone addiction later.
All right.
But actually, to the point about trust, the most challenging AV item for public safety in the United States was a tool, or is a tool, designed to further trust. And that's the use of body-worn cameras by law enforcement officers. The challenge of having that streaming from every law enforcement officer in the United States that's on the street at any one moment in time, capturing that data, tying it to the events where it belongs, storing that data for a certain period of time, which may be infinite depending on the type of event, and then being able to leverage that for benefit, that is a tremendous challenge. And at the same time that it was implemented to improve the public's trust in their law enforcement professionals, it sort of had a counter effect in some law enforcement agencies of causing officers to be concerned about the trust that their superiors and organizations had in them. And we have agencies that have resisted body-worn cameras for that reason. So it's an AV example that also exemplifies many of the other challenges we've talked about too.
Very good, thank you. David.
What binds critical control rooms is they exist to put things right when things go wrong. Hopefully we stop things going wrong in the first place, but when things do go wrong, critical control rooms really come into their own. And for any incident where you're trying to make right something that's gone wrong, you'll always have an agency commander of some description at the scene. So 2 parts to your question, Peter. What's happened so far, certainly in my organisation, is the ability to be able to stream multimedia footage to the scene commander so that he or she can make really good decisions based on what they know. Because whenever you're trying to sort out a situation that's gone wrong, you've always got far more unknowns than you've got knowns. So AV or multimedia helps us to do that. What am I most excited about for the future? 5G. Because what does 5G enable for us to really start getting that more engaging multimedia AV content out to those operational decision makers who are looking at a situation that's gone wrong and thinking, how do I put this right? And I think 5G, and we're playing around with it in London at the moment, 5G is really opening our eyes as to the art of the possible. And I think that this is an emerging market. The amount of latency it reduces, the amount of bandwidth it creates, what can you do in a year's time, because it will be a year, that we currently can't do, because suddenly the one moment, and you can always guarantee, and we have this in London all the time, the one time that you actually need a really good 4G signal, the incident has decided to locate itself where you only get a 2.5 or even a 2G signal, and that just ruins everything.
It does indeed, it does indeed. Thank you, David. Thierry, would you like to finish us off?
And yes, in the past few years, I think the main impact that AV had on us is to allow the operators to work throughout the night without putting a jumper or jacket in the middle of the night, around 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, when everything is quiet and you start to shiver because the air conditioning used for the computers in the room is going below 10 degrees or something like this. So now this was the main impact that we had recent years. In the future, I hope that we are going at ESA to merge the needs from this group 1 and group 2 of users. Group 2 will always have, when we launch a spacecraft, we still need to have the group of people, the flight control team, put together and act like in the old good time in the team. But when we are going to routine operations, then we will need to have this distributed environment involving 5G, involving remote access, and be able to work together when we are not together, work on the same data, and be able to take the right decision in real time. Because okay, if you send the wrong telecommand to a spacecraft, the spacecraft goes in space in a mode that is in a safe mode. There is nobody there to go and fix it. So you need this reaction time and the right decision at the right moment. That's why I'm emphasizing this distributed environment, allowing also to lower the impact on the infrastructure in terms of building. The buildings is something that is costly for us, okay? And when I say for us, ESA, this is also your money. European, I mean, I'm talking for the European citizen.
Yeah. So it doesn't include us, Dave. That's not us anymore. Okay.
So, and this is something we need to take also in account. Sorry for that.
Thierry, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had, I think, a very intelligent and wise panel on the forum in front of us here, talking about the use of AV in critical control rooms. Please put your hands together for Thierry Brew, Chris, Dave Jackson, and Jan Pederlee. Thank you, gentlemen.